Welcome to the Starting Over podcast training series. I am your host, Edward Shelton, aka Dark Logos. And in this episode, we are going to be looking at leadership. Leadership is a very distinctive power that has grown over the years, and it is very useful because it allows you to manipulate actioning. Okay, actioning is a very, very key thing, not just in placement, but in overall tempo establishment in the game. So let's get into it, okay? Leadership. At the beginning of your turn, give this character a free action and roll a d6 on a result of a 5 or 6. Add one action to your action total for that turn, and this character may remove an action token from an adjacent friendly character with a lower point value. Now, here's the issue with leadership, and I think one of the biggest complaints over the years was, I'm paying a ridiculous amount of points for leadership. It inflates the cost. Not only that, I add this action to my overall total, and that was it. But then when they added in the effect that you were able to remove a token from a figure, all of a sudden high point figures with leadership were valuable, because it didn't matter on your team ability, it didn't matter on your keyword, it was just bam, I'm more points than you, I have leadership, I rolled that 5 or 6, I'm taking tokens off. Okay, so overall we can see there's a lot of opportunity right there. So one of the biggest things you might ask yourself, or even ask me, is like, Dark Logos, what powers do we combine with leadership? And I would say, depending on your team and your tactic. If you're playing a very tent-polish team where there's one major attacker, you don't really want to look for leadership. Okay, you want to get other powers. Leadership isn't going to serve you as much. It's when we get to those balanced teams and those swarm teams. Balanced teams are, we're looking at a ranged combat attacker, a melee attacker, a support figure. Swarm teams, we're looking at just a bunch of figures all together. In those teams, we find the great power of leadership. Now, leadership is useful to be combined with more so your teammates or the other figures on the team's power than your own figure's powers. So we're not really going to look so much on what your figure's powers are, because it really doesn't matter as much. It's really mainly the point value. Okay, Mastermind is sort of good, but okay. But you can look at it as, all right, you have a 150 point leader that had 150 point figure that can use leadership. It's removing tokens off of figures 149 points and below. If you're looking at that, you want to say, in my team building, every figure that I have is going to be less than 150 points, and I can maximize this leadership. And I want to make sure that I'm going to have figures that are going to end their turn next to my leader. So when I roll D6, I can take tokens off. And if that figure has Indomitable or Willpower, I'm setting up some buffer so that if at any point in time I'm unable to roll leadership on a 5 or a 6, that figure can still act. But if I do and I take tokens off of that figure, then bam, they're able to act 3 or 4, or even at best case scenario 5 turns in a row. So that's something that we also want to consider. Also, you might want to think about, hey, I need a cheap taxi to get me around the field, or get this figure around the field. Then yeah, this would be another situation in which having leadership, you're able to take tokens off of your cheap taxi to allow them to keep going. Okay, so the main thing that we really want to look at is, does the adjacent figure have willpower, and is the adjacent figure a taxi? Now, it's really easy for me to say, like, oh yeah, take a token off of your psychic blaster, your ranged combat expert person, or any figure along those lines, and it's really easy to look at that. But really, you do want to look at those figures with willpower and Indomitable, and how your leadership is pairing with them more so. Now, if you're trying to use leadership as a ghetto willpower, it's not going to work as well. You're mainly trying to set it up so that your battle engine can go a little bit faster and pick up some more steam. Now, having 2 or 3 leaderships on the team, your results may vary. If you have a swarm team, having 2 or 3 leaderships can be awesome, because all of a sudden those little minions or those little figures are able to do so much more. You're taking tokens off, you're adding actions to your allotment. Okay, but here's the disadvantage. If all your other leadership figures that you have are not high enough points, then the only thing that ends up happening is you just added actions, you haven't taken tokens off. So with all your leadership figures, you need to be able to say, these are my higher point figures. They're able to take tokens off of these other figures. And really, I would say at the end game, is leadership as strong as beginning game or mid game? Not as much. Because usually there's less figures and the battlefield's a little bit more spread out by then. But if you have a very organized, coordinated effort, man, you can do some monstrous things. So, what are we going to do? What are we going to look at? How are we going to test this? Really, I want you to play a game that is 400 points with 2 figures with leadership. And I want them to be your higher point figures, and I want you to play at least about 5 figures total on your team. And I want you to see what happens. Now, your leadership figures can be your big cannons, or they can just, be there for leadership. But I want you to really just sit back, take it in, and be mindful of your placement, that every turn you are trying to roll for leadership. Write down what happens and what didn't happen. Did your opponent outwit your leadership? Did you just get knocked off of leadership? Was having 2 leaderships enough at 400 points? Did you need 3 to really make what you were doing work? And then really examine, was what you were doing efficient? Were you, was having 2 leaderships on that team really not that effective, or did you really need to have those 2 leaderships? Okay. All right, that's pretty much it. Thank you for listening. And as a special bonus for listening to this last video, we are going to talk about special powers in the next video. So I will see you there.